Welcome to Beyond Business, the show where we look at the latest trends in the global economy. Today we're honing in on the business of mental health. We're looking at allegations that drug companies are pushing to change the definition of mental illness for their own benefit. The controversy centers on a book that's been billed as the psychiatrist's Bible. It catalogues mental disorders and their symptoms, and its real name is a lot clunkier, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM for short. Last year, the fifth version of the book came out, unleashing a storm of criticism. Some accused its authors of bowing to the lobbying of the pharmaceutical industry to sell more drugs. The critics say normal human behavior may be classed as mental illness. Claire Murphy has more.
Life is full of ups and downs, but when distresses and disappointments deserve to be classified as psychiatric illness, it's feared millions of healthy people are now being diagnosed with a mental disorder and receiving unnecessary treatment. Many blame the US Bible of Psychiatry, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Its fifth edition, published last May, lists a fourfold increase in the number of possible diagnoses since it was first released in 1952. This disturbs many, including this Paris-based practitioner who has set up an association to highlight the book's excessive approach.
Take mourning. If after 15 days anyone who has lost a loved one continues to be sad, cheerless, with sleeping problems, dark thoughts, and lack of drive or energy, what would you say? Well, it's normal grief after 15 days. But for DSM-5, it's not normal mourning. It's a major depressive episode. So it's possible to prescribe psychotropic drugs, particularly antidepressants.
Joint British-German research shows 10% of middle-aged Europeans took antidepressants over the course of 2010. But why do such numbers require a pill to cope with life, or find they need drugs to create a chemical happiness?
The norms in psychiatry are a colossal economic issue. If you change the thresholds for inclusion, you include hundreds of thousands more people in the pathology. And so you create many more clients for the pharmaceutical industry.
Other professionals also warn that everyday problems are being increasingly labelled as mental illness. They say the trend could have shocking implications for individuals and for society, as drug companies reap multi-billion-dollar profits.
Part of the problem of diagnostic inflation is that the definitions in the manual are too loose. But it's not just how the manual's written, it's how it's actually used. And the drug companies have had tremendous influence in convincing doctors and patients and school teachers that psychiatric illness is very common, is often missed, is always caused by a chemical imbalance, and is treatable by a pill.
A 2012 study published in the PLOS Medicine journal urged reform, highlighting that the DSM-5 panel of experts were not free of conflicts of interest with the pharmaceutical industry. Psychiatrist Alan Francis, who led the drafting of DSM-4, accuses the American Psychiatric Association, which is behind the publication, of churning it out far too quickly. He claims the new expanded version ensures a lucrative stream of income for the organisation.
The DSM-5 is an enormously profitable publishing asset for the American Psychiatric Association. It's a bestseller every single year all around the world. The result of this financial conflict of interest for the American Psychiatric Association is a manual that's changed too frequently.
But some practitioners come to the defence of DSM-5. They believe the manual provides a useful tool for explaining complicated human behaviour, while respecting the boundary of what is considered normal.
People do not rush to add a diagnosis. This idea that there is diagnostic inflation, I think it's another look, another effort to understand. I think if you read the works of those who produced the DSM-5, it's truly an effort to make it clinically useful.
Useful, but for whom? Psychiatrists agree a reference guide providing common terminology for mental illness is a necessity. But who wants a society in which all of its members are defined as ill?
Okay, you heard there the criticism directed at the DSM. It's published by the American Psychiatric Association, the largest such organization in the world. It denies the pharmaceutical industry had undue influence over the writing of the DSM-5. Philip Crowther tells us that part of the story from the United States.
The American Psychiatric Association is headquartered in this building in Arlington, just across the river from Washington, D.C. One of the men responsible for the DSM-5 is proud of the publication. It defines at which moment an illness can be defined as a mental illness.
This is the DSM-1 that was written in 1952. The DSM-5 was written then in just published in May of 2013.
This one took 13 years to publish. The cost, almost $22 million. It's now the reference tool for psychiatrists the world over.
If this kind of revision process were done by the WHO, which is a political organization, you would often have countries lobbying for their national, perspectives. And if it were done in the U.S., you would have congressional committees that would be dealing with the autism folks and with the Alzheimer's folks and with the schizophrenia.
The American Psychiatric Association is the world's largest grouping of psychiatrists, which makes promotion of said publication that little bit easier.
So, continuing with our coverage of the very biggest story here at the conference, the launch of the new DSM-5 guidelines.
There were lots of controversies, and to start off with, there was a major concern about whether the DSM would in some way be influenced by the pharmaceutical industry. Members could not receive more than $10,000 per year from all pharmaceutical companies.
Psychiatry might not be considered an exact science, but researchers on this manual will agree that exact definitions are needed.
Now, the DSM is far from the only document to define mental illness, but it has become the standard for health professionals around the world. France is no exception, and we went to a mental health centre in this country to see how the DSM is used in practice. Claire Williams has more.
Look straight in front of you.
Testing blood pressure, taking samples and monitoring weight. Here, body and mind are kept in check.
We take a global view of the patient.
Emmanuelle does not work in a psychiatric hospital. She's a nurse in a mental health centre. It opened in 2007 and is part of a foundation that brings together 34 centres within the auspices of French teaching hospitals. The foundation deals mostly with patients suffering schizophrenia, bipolar disorder and depression, as well as severe forms of autism.
L'objet, c'est de prévenir.
The goal is prevention, putting in place treatment adapted to dealing with mental health illnesses and associated somatic diseases.
The foundation also carries out research. Patients are part of a database that groups more than 3,000 different mental health criteria. The goal is to improve diagnosis, but still using the DSM-5 to classify symptoms.
The real question surrounding the DSM is clearly not over-medicalization or proliferation of psychiatric diagnoses. We don't invent illnesses for patients who are not actually ill. The question is about trying to find a patient's problem when they're suffering and need care.
Patients need care, doctors need classification. Between the two, for some, the DSM fits the bill in psychiatric diagnosis and care.
The DSM controversy feeds into a larger debate on how to treat mental illness. Some say doctors reach too easily for the prescription pad. They say health professionals should focus less on medication and more on therapy. The Netherlands is seen as a test case. Let's take a look.
The statistic is alarming. Between 1994 and 2009, antidepressant use rose by an average of almost 20% in Europe. In the Netherlands, the surge was only 3%, partly because the Dutch used to get 5 sessions with a psychologist paid for by the state, helping some avoid turning to antidepressant drugs.
A lot of people who are in the primary psychological healthcare are helped within 5 talks and don't need further help.
The DSM-5 is used for classification and diagnosis. Marielle Beckers says it's not ideal because it encourages overprescription.
If I have the DSM and I have the child over there, I can do, yeah, he has ADHD, but then how do you treat him? You don't want to treat this kid with medicine. because, you know, the problem is in the surrounding.
Her advice has fallen on deaf ears in the Dutch government. It's recently stopped subsidising the 5 psychology sessions, opening the door to more prescriptions for antidepressant drugs.
Okay, that wraps up this edition of Beyond Business. Don't forget that you can find this and other editions of the program on our website, france24.com. For now, thank you for watching and stay with us here at France 24. We have more news coming your way.